Hello and welcome to C-Suite Secrets. I'm Heather Parsons, your host, a serial entrepreneur, fractional CFO, and a business value strategist. I've spent years juggling business and family life while helping entrepreneurs scale, optimize cash flow, and build real financial success. On our show, we bring you real conversations with founders, executives, and operators that actually move the needle in business. No fluff, no filler, just smart strategy, systems that work, and insights that you can put to use in your business right away. With that, let's dive right in. Today, we have JP Revel on the show. JP, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice being here.
So glad to have you. For those who may not be familiar with you just yet, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you become an entrepreneur?
Sure, I'd love to. I guess I would start with just, I grew up in Indiana, uh, lived in Chicago and San Francisco, and now in St. Louis, and uh, I feel like entrepreneurship is my third career. I had an IT career and then a software development freelance career, and then moved into starting my own business around 2010 and been doing that ever since.
I love it. So I love whenever I talk to folks who have had multiple rebirths, reiterations with careers and stuff. So what made you make the change? Like, I love technology. I've been in technology the majority of my career. So what made you make the leap to being an entrepreneur rather than, somebody in technology or working in software development?
Uh, the answer to that is one of those things where it seemed like it was a little thing at the time, but it was a very important event. So I was working for an ad agency in San Francisco in 2002. They pulled me into an office and said, "Hey, we're going to close down this office. We're going to do like a series of layoffs, and we'd like you to stay till the end because you're in IT and we need someone to like remove access and help with that kind of stuff." And then we got down and this was a 70-person agency, and we got down to like the last five or three or something. And they said, "Hey, when we're done doing these layoffs, would you mind sticking around a little bit and like shipping the computers back to New York? And if you want, you could help us clean out the office and get rid of junk and all that." And I was like, I didn't have a job. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So I was the last one to leave the door. I like locked the door and put the key in an envelope and mailed it to New York. And
Wow.
that was a pivotal moment. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but I decided that I wanted to spread my risk and not just work for one company. I thought that I had this feeling like employment was a thin veil of security. And so I wanted to spread my risk, and I didn't even know to call it freelancing, but I just got a few part-time, or, not even part-time, just a few freelance jobs, and had decent success doing that for a while. I managed to do it for about a dozen years. But even that, just being solo, self-employed, it was like a feast or famine. And I was a glutton for punishment. I was like the worst boss I've ever had. So I was like, I never could say no to a job, and I would end up working all the time. And I do remember there was a time, maybe like 2008, when there was crisis. There was a recession crisis,
Oh, yeah.
and I was still getting opportunities, and I would just say yes to all of them, and I would end up working until like 2 in the morning, and would come home to a sleeping house, and then wake up and everyone had already left for school and stuff. And I just was like, I think I'm doing it wrong. I think something is not working right. And that was really just the tip of the iceberg. So I decided that it would be better to try to build a team of other freelancers. That's kind of how I got started. And I ended up being a project manager. I didn't even like, I was worse at a project manager than I was at writing code. And thankfully I found someone who was willing to do anything. And this lady's name was Jean, and she came, she had been working at Pottery Barn, but she did have a secret talent, is that her husband had built a company and sold it.
Oh,
So she
nice.
had some really relevant experience, even though it didn't look like it on her resume. So she really helped me with like billing and finance and chasing down delinquent payments, which has got to be my least favorite thing to do.
Mhm.
And because it was personal, when it's your company and you're asking someone to pay the bill that they're late on, it's hard to feel like you're able to like keep a client relationship and ask for money, or like ask for the money that you're due. So she did that, and then she was my first project manager, and then we just kept going, from there.
I love it. That's a great story. That's a lot going on there and a lot of different roles. So from being a freelancer and working for others to owning your own business and really building out this team, what, what were some of the things that you learned and what was the hardest part about switching over to that more of a leadership role?
Probably the first really valuable lesson that comes to mind. I learned it in this group called EO Accelerator. It's like a just above like an incubator. It's kind of like businesses that are over 250,000 in revenue. And I went to a class or like a training day, and they talked about delegate and elevate. And we like took all the tasks that we did in a week, and which ones were, we were like better than most people, which ones were we good, like reasonably good at doing, which ones were neutral, and which ones were we actually, poor at doing. And then also the energy, like what gives you energy and what just drains it. And probably the most valuable lesson from that was there are people who at least are neutral or may actually get energy from and are good at things that you suck at.
Yeah,
And that was such a freeing feeling. Like, okay, it's true. We're all different people. We have different skills and personality, and chasing down a delinquent payment is like kryptonite for me. And Jean didn't mind. She was neutral at least. And she was actually good at it.
that's
I called her
great.
the velvet hammer. She made sure she was firm, but never unpleasant. And she got it done.
That's great. That's really one of the first things that I do with a lot of the entrepreneurs I work with is that time and energy audit. Because I really find that a lot of times these founders are their own bottleneck and their own detriment, and they wind up with a business that runs their life
Oh,
rather than, a business that supports the life that they want. And it's hard to go from one to the other, especially before you hit that $1 million in revenue mark,
mhm.
because you're wearing so many hats and doing so many of the tasks, whether it's, collections, deliverables, whatever that is. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that, especially, and then we can dive into running multiple companies at the same time. I'm a glutton for punishment and do that myself. My husband and I have a real estate investment company and we have my fractional CFO practice. So we are constantly working and doing that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that's worked for you and some of
Mm.
those changes there.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. So the first was maybe like year five, someone had recommended the book The E Myth, and it's basically about a lady who makes really great pies, and everyone encouraged her to start a pie business. And that's what I was. I was the developer who started the development business, and the skill set is very different. So that
Yes,
was probably the hardest thing, is like, I got to the point where eventually, I mean, I almost say I'm proud of this now. Like maybe 3 to 5 years in, I stopped writing code. And that was really important. because the business was not going to grow if I was in there writing code all the time. But lots of other areas, as you say, you wear all the hats in the beginning, and some are, kind of fun, even if they're not really that much value creation, but you still have to figure out what do I need to make space in my time for, and again, measuring energy and your talent, but it's just this constant practice of what can I let go, and it's not easy to some things I held on to way too long. And I like to say, I made every mistake in the book building Leelander. I mean, it was just a lot of trial and error and hitting my head against the wall. But I will say that groups like EO Accelerator and EO, later EO, both were really helpful for me to be around peers that were doing the same thing, even if it was a different industry. So that I learned a lot from others when it came to that. But that was one. And then you mentioned the running multiple businesses. Well, that was not my intention. I didn't set out to run two businesses at once, but I think really I couldn't escape the reason. So it was much more of a heart decision. And I'd been running Leelander for, I think it was 11, 12 years when I decided to start my second company, which is major digital marketing. So I started a marketing agency, but it's all because it was a heart decision. And so I learned about the Philippines during COVID, during 2020. And most people go to the Philippines for low cost labor, like virtual assistants and that kind of thing. And I learned about it because someone started a virtual assistant company. But for me, it was different. I learned about the virtual assistants, but I came away wanting to know more about the Philippines. And I ended up having, I believe it was a spiritual kind of decision, where it's I felt like the Holy Spirit was telling me that this is a place I can make an impact. And that, oddly enough, I felt like I heard that maybe they would have an impact on me. So it was this reciprocal impact. So that's really the thing that was the spark that started it. And I first hired talent from the Philippines to do the back office of Leelander. And then I went there and I met the team, and they were great, wonderful people. But I saw the beauty and the tragedy of the Philippines, and where there was beauty, I appreciated it. And where there was tragedy, I had compassion. When I was there, that's the day that I sort of declared to them that there was more to do than just have a back office, and that was kind of the impetus. So Major exists for the Filipino people, and we're giving 10% of the profit back to Philippines causes, to build houses and teach financial literacy. Heather, maybe you want to do that?
Yeah, I will.
And then
I have a heart for that. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, that, and then equipping for natural disaster. So those are the three pillars we're working on, and there's so much need there, and it's a wonderful place, wonderful people, happy, resilient people, but there's just an incredible amount of need. So that, Leelander was much more practical. I'd been doing development, and I started a development company. I wanted to grow. I wanted to even just start with having a backup for myself so I could take an hour off or an afternoon. But major was much more of a heart decision.
I love that. And I lived in a third world country for almost 2 years.
Really?
So I lived in Turkey. Yeah. And I find that whenever you see how resilient people are, it's pretty incredible, and how blessed we are here in the States. I've traveled the world a lot, been very blessed to get to do that. And there's nothing quite as humbling as experiencing that.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
Kudos to you for leaning in there. I love our folks in the Philippines. They're amazing, and we try to approach it a little different, just like what you're talking about there. I think, and I love your thoughts on this, the importance of a living wage, and I'm not talking like the US minimum wage where people are still out doing a lot of things. I grew up super poor as a kid, and I don't mean like I only had one pair of Jordans. I mean like my dad poached deer for food. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So like there's a big difference there. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the difference you've seen with the people and trying to make an impact, not just utilize cheap labor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. I don't want to take the whole all of your
Yeah.
time to talk about it, but I will say that average Filipino is just surviving. And one thing I appreciate is that their sense of community is really great. Like the US in contrast is much more individualistic.
Yeah.
And there's pros and cons to each. But when you are in survival, it's really, I mean, you need a community, you need others because otherwise things get desperate. And when they're desperate, then bad things happen, just bad decisions, people do whatever they can to survive. And I empathize, but it's no way to live. So when I think about, that what's a living wage, I mean, gosh, compared to here, it's just so opposite.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm trying to think of like how would I feel about it. I mean, I don't know how they can have a minimum wage there. It just forces things to be. Um, I don't know. That I feel like that forces the economy to grow differently. I'm not sure if that's the right way, but at least people should see their worth and people should see their value. And sometimes I fear that they're not. You know.
Right. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, whenever I look at countries outside of the US through their lens versus our lens, things like a minimum wage doesn't make sense. Doesn't really make sense here either, but for a whole host of other reasons I will not get into today. I'll save that for a rant another time. But I love what you're doing there, and I love that you're expanding and trying to help out. And I believe I've seen this in my own business. It makes a difference on your return on investment because I feel that people are much more invested.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just there for a paycheck that they can go get somewhere else, which is, a lot of the culture in the States today. People
Mm-hmm.
jump from one job to the other, and that's fine. You do you, no judgment there. But as you're building a business and as you're an entrepreneur, having that loyalty and people who are willing to work hard, it matters. So,
Huge, huge. Yeah, I mean, I see it with my team. I mean, they are bought into the mission. They're bought into the vision of what we're trying to do, and I think it also attracts the right kinds of clients. We've had a couple that didn't buy into the vision, and they not unsurprisingly didn't last. But the ones who did, they are extremely happy, and they feel like they're a part of this difference that we're trying to make. And so it's great for clients, it's great for the team, and it just feels good. It's easier to wake up in the morning and do something.
I love it. That's the goal, right? So we want to make an impact on the world, not just collect a paycheck and live until we don't anymore. So I love what you're doing there. And as an entrepreneur, we're in a unique position where you get to do both. You get to build a business and reap those rewards, but you also get to have an impact and help other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, just talking about that return on investment, whenever, somebody's looking at their investment or return on investment from a marketing perspective, how do you help them think through some of that stuff?
Gosh. So I mean, I'm thinking about that both for Leelander and Major Major. There's a return on investment in both cases. So I'll tackle Major Major first and then say something about Leelander.
Yeah.
When I think about return on investment for the client, because at the end of the day, we are still doing marketing work for clients, and they expect good quality, expect good service, and that's what we work to try to achieve. But probably one of the most common misnomers is that like marketing is going to have this immediate impact on the return, and you can get lucky and there can be things that can get returned quickly, but that is the exception more than the rule. And there was someone famous who said, I'm positive that 50% of my marketing works. I just don't know which 50%.
I love it. That's
So
great.
you need to have a mix of things that you're doing, and you have to be patient because it's not an overnight success. And it takes time, but the clients that we have recognize that, and they're willing to be patient and they're willing to see the success. And we track a lot of stuff through like analytics between websites and socials and all these things where we can see how things change, month to month or quarter to quarter. But we don't want people to be changing all the time because it's too, you need to have something run long enough to know if it's effective.
That
And
makes a
then
lot
on
of
the
sense.
Leelander side, I mean, the cost of software can be gigantic. And so you really do need to make sure that there's a solid business case for it and that the company sees the return for the thing that you're automating and or the thing that you're building. So maybe my favorite one that people don't think about as much is, especially if we're building something for an internally for a company, it really speaks to the value of the company to their employees. If you build something intuitive and make something easy to use, then it builds retention. I've just talked to a prospect. I won't say who or what industry or anything, but they were bought by PE, and the PE company came in and changed their software, and something that used to take 7 clicks to get there now takes like 33. And so you can't help but feel devalued as an employee when the same task takes so much longer. And it's not only about speed. There's a lot of other like psychological and things you can tell your employees or tell the users about their software that gives them delight. We want to delight our users.
That's great. And that's a great way to look at it. Coming from technology and working in tech for years and years, I find that the more you keep it simple, the better people like it. Because at the end of the day, especially as an accountant who works in technology and spent the majority of my career there, if I can do it faster in a spreadsheet, I don't want your technology. It's like, unless there's some real benefit to that, right? So
Sure.
it's all about that return on investment. Is it going to help me somewhere else? And I feel the same way about marketing. I look at marketing as it's like pushing a snowball up the hill. Sometimes it's a steeper hill, sometimes not so steep, but it's not going to be instant. But I feel like whenever it takes off, it really goes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I love your perspective on that. And, as you're working with folks, what is a more honest timeline of whenever they can start to see some return on those dollars that they're spending?
My opinion is if you can get a mix of marketing going for a year and then measure it by quarter, and you can make changes on the quarter, but you don't really want to just do it for like 3 months or something. There's not that much value to marketing something for just 3 months. It's a long game. So if you've marketed something for a year and you're not seeing it and you've tried multiple things, then it's time to maybe look at the brand or look at some other aspect of product market fit or some other area that might be an issue. But it takes a commitment of some time.
That makes sense. I listen to Alex Harmozy and some of these other guys a lot, and he talks about that. He said, I was so sick of hearing my book launch, and I was asking them when this is going to be over, and he's like, we've not even started it yet. So it's like somebody who's running a business, I think we fall into that trap sometimes. We hear about it internally all the time, but maybe we're not being as patient as we could be so that our audience hears it and so
Mm,
that we can build a community around our products.
that's great.
So
Yeah. How about you? Like, what are some of the marketing channels that you guys use?
Marketing, we do a little bit of everything. I don't think it's,
Good.
you know, in person, like we always appreciate a warm referral,
Mm-hmm.
but we still have to be relevant on social media, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. My marketing person is trying to talk me into doing TikTok. I feel that I'm a little old, but I'm getting with the program. My
Yeah.
daughters are helping with that process, but it's just finding things where you can be authentic. And I
Mm.
really do want to help people, so if I can shorten their timeline with their business or prevent them from, being a small business failure statistic,
Mm.
I'm down to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So if that means I do silly TikTok video or try to break down some complicated accounting principles in a very layman's way of doing it so that my 19-year-old understands, I'm happy to do it. It's not about me, and that's the part I keep trying to focus on.
Mm. That's great. I think I can't tell you how much I value that, because even as someone who's run two businesses and have been doing it for almost 15 years, I still have fears about accounting. It's not over. And sometimes it could be as simple as having fears about cash flow. Sure.
We all have
But
those.
that's kind of an easy level. But then there's like there's a lot of complexity that I never, I didn't go to school for accounting. I don't know. And, I don't want to be audited. So there's, you want to make sure that you're doing it right, and you don't, and I need to depend on expertise of others when it comes to that.
I couldn't agree more, and that's where we have to lean on, as you were talking about initially, the strengths of other people. It took me a long time working at a big four firm and getting a couple master's degrees to know what I know in accounting, right? So you got to surround yourself with people who know things you don't and ask the question, because it may be something that I can break down for you in a short 5-minute phone call and be like, oh no, have you thought about this, this, and this over here? And we'll do something different. I'll tell you a short client story. I was working with a local business owner, and we were talking about bringing in a partner. And one way we could have structured that deal, he would have had to pay almost 100 grand in taxes. If we did it a little bit differently, changed like 2 sentences on the documents, he didn't have to pay that anymore. But you wouldn't naturally know that if you hadn't done it a few times. So it's worth having a phone call or bringing somebody onto your team that can lean into those things. And
Mm.
that's why we're doing a couple of things to help out entrepreneurs in that space.
That's fantastic. Wow. Yeah, that's got to feel good to see like a way to save a client $100,000 if it's a small business. I mean, that's life or death to some companies. I mean, it would have been incredibly unpleasant in mine.
Right. Well, it means a lot of difference in when do you get to retire,
Mm.
right? So it's like how many of those do you need before you can now step away from the business
Hmm.
versus now you're giving the government your money. And again, I'm not going to get into that today, but it's those sort of things that a short call and a relationship can help you solve. And I love how you're working with it as well. You're helping people solve those challenges and really focus on the business. And that's where I think whether it's marketing or it's accounting and finance, or I have a partner that I work with on some lending things, it's putting all those pieces and parts together. Accounting is naturally boring, like watching paint dry, but you can use it to solve business problems. And that's where I think the value's at.
Mm. Yeah, when you were saying, it changes when you retire. It also changes if your business tanks.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. That's several different payroll runs for most businesses.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, that's great. One other thing that you talked about whenever we're talking about hiring in the Philippines, what are some of the things that you've seen with other businesses that they really get wrong in working with folks in the Philippines or offshore in general?
Mm. Uh, well, I think because my heart is tied to the country, I think the first thing that people get wrong is they just treat people as like a machine. Like they just email them some things and then expect an email back, and there's no personal connection whatsoever. And I know and respect people that are in the business community that don't really count them as employees. And yes, they're in a different time zone, and sometimes the time zone is unpleasant, or you don't want them to work all night. I don't want them to work all night. So, finding a way to connect and the way to have some sort of understanding and a personal connection between the team members is super essential to me. And I see a lot of people just treating it like throwing it over the fence. So that was, and I guess I hope that I would have done that from the start, but I remember that was something that someone shared with me, like make sure that they come to all the meetings and feel like they're part of the team. And it still is a practice. I still see some people, like when there's like asking everyone like a personal win at the beginning of a meeting or something. And sometimes they skip the Filipinos. I'm like, hey, wait, they're not just here to take notes.
No, we got
People.
AI for that now.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think that's something, a good, valuable lesson. I've seen that, I worked with a lot of folks in India in my prior roles before I started my own company. And I love the folks I worked with in the Philippines, but they're people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more people treat them like people, the better off they'll do in your business. So I love it. You also mentioned EO, their accelerator program. So what do you think one of the biggest business skills was that you got out of that program?
Oh gosh, that's impossible to tell you. There's so many. The delegation was good in the beginning. There was if you're and in Nashville, I think they call it something different. I think they call it catalyst or something. But I tongue in cheek call it like the Fisher Price version of EO. But it has advantages over EO because it's just trying to get you to the $1 million revenue goal, and you're supposed to age out or time out. Like you're supposed to only be there for a while, but the peer-to-peer learning with other budding entrepreneurs, and then at least in St. Louis, those groups or those peer groups are led by a mentor. They call it like a coach. And it's all about accountability. And there's like these training days. There's like a people day, a money day, a cash strategy, and why am I forgetting? Execution. So they have these training days, and I remember the first time I went, they said, no cell phones for the day. And I just remember thinking, my company's going to die. No one can reach me all day. I didn't know this, but it does force you to work on the business versus in it. So lots of valuable lessons in that, and the accountability to others. Like when you're running your own business, you don't really have to be accountable to anyone. So it's really nice to have someone to, even at a soft nudge, be like, hey, that thing that you said you were going to do, did you do it? That was super helpful. And then EO had a whole different, EO's mission is a little different because it's business, family, personal, kind of like the holistic entrepreneur. And it's not pushing you towards a goal. It's pushing you towards learning and growing. So they do want to see their business grow. And that's what I think most people hope for, but it's less like pushing you on a path that expires. It's more like giving you a sort of support system, maybe a little like having your own board, like people that you can share ideas. And really valuable to EO is they teach you not to give advice. So they instead want you to share your experience. And when someone shares experience, then the receiver can take what they want from the experience instead of just having to accept or deny the advice.
That's smart.
Yeah, it was really like, I still think that's brilliant. It's like a good way to live your life in many ways, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to look at things. in general, and having that board, I think, is crucial for all businesses, regardless of where they're at revenue wise. Even if you're a solopreneur, having somebody else to ask is amazing because, I do a prayer thing once a week with some other entrepreneurs and just women who pray over your family and your business and your life. And you can talk to other entrepreneurs about things that your family or friend group may look at you like you have three heads for. Like we had a fire on the porch on one of our apartments this week. She had something with, something else crazy happen. And she's like, you can't tell people that because they'll look at you like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you doing this or whatever? And I think it's the same for all businesses. It may be slightly different, but having other people who are in business around you, at least you have somebody to talk to about it that doesn't necessarily think you're crazy.
Yeah.
For the stuff you tolerate every day.
Yeah, I think that's a great example because certainly crazy things happen in business. But I actually, when you're saying that, the thought that came to mind is even the success.
Right.
It's hard to celebrate a win. Not always, but I have a friend who lost a friend because he was trying to celebrate a win and he was getting this big account and the guy thought that he was getting too rich or too much money from it, that he wasn't, and it's a sad situation. You really want to have like a group of people, some sort of a board or mentor or someone that you can share the wins as well as the challenges, of which there are many.
Right, exactly. And I think that what you're talking about there reminds me of a group that I used to be in. And, people had all sorts of different things that they wanted from business and from life and their portfolio and that sort of thing. And the deal in the group was if Bill wants a yacht in the Mediterranean, we're going to celebrate for Bill. Even if you're like, why in the hell do we need this, right? It's not about you. It's something that somebody else wants, and we're there to celebrate, not to tear it down or ask questions or make them feel bad about it. I love it.
Brilliant.
Well, this has been a great conversation. One last question I have to wrap us up. I would love to know, what is one secret that you wish you would have known starting out as an entrepreneur?
Well, it somewhat relates to things we've been talking about, but I'd say that you don't have to go it alone. There's like, entrepreneurship can feel very lonely. You can't talk to your employees about certain things, or they might not understand. You can't talk to your family. You just feel like you could be sort of isolated in that position, but really don't want to go it alone. That's a huge part of it. And it's a great question. I'm sorry to just off the cuff, just thinking about what I wish I would have known. This is another one. You do need the support too, because you have all the problems. Like, even as the company gets bigger, the problems get bigger and they're yours. The buck stops with you. I didn't realize how many problems you would go through in a week, but you do. And that could be fun if you like to solve, but it can also be exhausting. So you want support.
Absolutely. Well, this conversation has been great. Before we wrap up, JP, so where can our listeners connect with you or learn more about what you're working on?
Sure. Love to talk to anyone. So Leelander.com is the custom software development company. We didn't really touch on this, but Leelander was just acquired. And the buying company is called 1905 New Media. So either at 1905 or at Leelander, you can talk to me there. Or if you're interested in learning about Major, it is major.marketing is the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for listening to C-Suite Secrets. If you have found today's conversation as valuable as I have, be sure to hit that like and follow button. and share this episode with somebody else who's growing a business. If you want more tips on how to grow your business between episodes, you can check us out on C-Suite Insiders on Facebook, or you can catch me on Instagram at Heather Parsons Official. Until next time, keep growing, and remember, you don't have to do this alone.